Guilty, guilty, guilty. It's not just 3 times Hunter Biden's been found guilty, but we've also got 3 cases of guilty Democrats, guilty of breaking the law, guilty of betraying our nation. Yes, we've got full coverage of the Hunter Biden verdicts that just came down within the last hour. Nancy Pelosi, also guilty of undermining security in the Capitol. You hear it spoken out of her own mouth as she admits responsibility for January 6th, and guilty, more importantly, of a cover-up in an attempt to frame innocent Americans. We'll give you all those details. And Alejandro Mayorkas, guilty of undermining the security of our nation and guilty of violating our immigration laws. They're all guilty, my friends. And we've got all the details coming up right now. My name's Larry O'Connor. You can call me Larry. Yes, in a federal courtroom in Wilmington, Delaware, the son of the President of the United States has been found guilty on 3 federal criminal charges. This is the first time in American history that the son of a president, a child of a president, has been found guilty of federal crimes while that president is in office. It's Hunter Biden. Let's go straight to some of the reactions as the verdict came down very quickly. The jury got this case yesterday. They deliberated a little bit, took the night off, came back this morning, had some coffee, and said, why are we wasting our time here? Obviously, he's guilty. In fact, the only time that was wasted probably was where these people who live in Delaware were weighing the fact that they're never going to be invited to the best cocktail parties ever again, because every single day in the front row of that courtroom was Jill Biden, the stepmother of Hunter Biden, the accused, and the First Lady of the United States. She was there to send a message to those jurors that this is the Biden family you're effing with. You better do the right thing. You better have jury nullification here. We know the evidence implicates him. We know he's guilty, but that's not the point. If you actually convict him, your life is done here in Delaware. But despite that, the jury came through. In fact,
like they're being treated as chumps. And I think that here the jury followed
Jonathan,
their instructions.
excuse me, we're seeing the First Lady, Jill Biden, walk into the courthouse.
Yeah, she was late getting there, trying to rush in, saying, wait a second, how could they do this? I want the names and faces of every person. In fact, one of the reasons why she was there was to look at each juror individually and memorize their faces. So she makes sure that they're not invited to any of the swanky to-dos out there in Delaware. It's a corrupt state. And at the head of that corrupt state is the Biden criminal family. That's what they were hoping for, but they didn't get it. Listen, this is kind of a anticlimactic moment here because we all knew Hunter Biden was guilty of these crimes. I mean, the crime was lying about your drug addiction when filling out a federal registration form for a firearm. His own memoir wrote about how he was addicted to drugs at that very time. I mean, he admitted to being guilty of this crime in his own memoirs and in his own contemporaneous text messages and emails that we've all seen. Also, by the way, less than a year ago, he walked into that same federal courtroom ready to plead guilty to these charges because Joe Biden's corrupt Justice Department was willing to give him a sweetheart deal in exchange for a guilty plea. So he was guilty because Hunter Biden was ready to plead guilty. But then he lost that sweetheart deal only because of 2 brave whistleblowers from the IRS who stepped forward weeks before the sentencing was supposed to take place in that guilty plea. And after they revealed that they had been prevented from bringing charges and that the Justice Department under Joe Biden and under Merrick Garland had been dragging their feet and allowed the statute of limitations on some of the most severe tax charges to expire, well, that's when the Justice Department had to save face. That's when they had to take this seriously. And here we are less than a year later with guilty pleas. Now, that's all good news, like I said. And it is good news, first of all, when guilty people are actually held accountable for their crimes. It's important when Democrats are actually found guilty because we have not seen much of that lately. We've been forgiven if we believe that we have a 2-tiered system of justice here where the law treats you very differently if you have a D behind your name or if you're well connected politically, like in the Clinton family, the Obama family, or the Biden family. So it's nice to see justice come through, but let's be real about this. This thing stinks to high heaven, okay? I'm sorry. If you look at what's on the Biden laptop, the representation of foreign countries without registering as a foreign agent, the money laundering with over 20 different shell corporations to move money back and forth from international wire transfers from countries that we have a hostile relationship with, either Kazakhstan or Ukraine or Russia or China. The fact that not only did the Hunter Biden and the president's brother James Biden participate in these transactions, but so did the president of the United States. All of the money that was made from foreign countries to sell influence to the vice president at the time. You know what's interesting about these felony gun charges? Of all the crimes that Hunter Biden appears to have committed, the federal gun charges are maybe one of only a handful that don't also implicate the president of the United States. Do you think that's a coincidence? Of course it's not. We've got a little bit more analysis on this, but this just in, the president himself, Joe Biden, has issued a statement on this. I'll read it for you. The Biden statement on Hunter, according to Sam Stein, who writes, where is he now? Politico? MSNBC Politico. I will accept the outcome of this case and will continue to respect the judicial process as Hunter considers an appeal. Jill and I will always be there for Hunter and the rest of our family with our love and support. Nothing will ever change that. Yeah, well, we'll get into what Joe Biden might do about this a little bit later. Let's turn to MSNBC and see how they're spinning this, shall we? The gentleman on the right that you see there with the headphones on, that's Andrew Weissman. You might remember his name. He was the lead prosecutor in Robert Mueller's investigation into the Russian collusion hoax during the Trump administration. He also, by the way, is the humiliated prosecutor in the Enron case during the Bush administration that implicated tangentially George Bush and Texas politics. That's why they went after Enron, by the way, because Enron were huge contributors to the Republican Party and to Bush. His convictions got overturned at the Supreme Court, but that doesn't matter, you see. You use the law as a political weapon. That's what Andrew Weissman does. That's what he did. That's what he continues to do. So how does he spin these convictions?
You know, I'm less interested in the particulars of the case. This is a gun charge. The proof was overwhelming. I agree with your other panelists that it is rarely charged. In my experience, over 21 years at the department, I never saw this kind of case brought. It would normally be somebody who was a felon in possession of a gun that would be charged. I'm more interested in what it tells us about the rule of law in this country in two ways. One, the son of the sitting president was pretty quickly tried. He was given due process and he was found guilty. And you have the current president, the father of the defendant, making it absolutely clear that he is not pardoning him, that he could have ordered at any time his Justice Department to get rid of this case. He did not do that. He has said that he is not planning on pardoning him as well. And I really think that if you look at this case, what is the big picture here? It's not a drug addict who possessed a gun for 2 weeks. It is that you have a president of the United States who is living embodiment of the rule of law, even with respect to his only living son.
Oh, my Lord. Honestly, I think my gag reflex is going to get triggered with this. You see what's happening here, right? This is a fig leaf. This is a distraction. This is a see, nobody is above the law, you see. I got a question for Mr. Weissman. So he was found guilty of possessing a firearm while under the influence of and being addicted to illicit drugs, right? And part of the evidence of that was showing all of the drug transactions that he was engaged in via text message and emails on the laptop, right? So where are the drug charges? Where are the drug charges? Oh, and by the way, there was also other criminal activity that he was engaged in while he was using drugs. You look at the text messages and the emails, and he's coordinating with prostitutes and with pimps who were peddling prostitutes, many of whom, according to the pictures, seem to be underage. Where are those charges? Why aren't we bringing the if we have the epitome of the rule of law embodied in this case, then why is this the only thing he's facing? Where are all those other charges? Not to mention the financial charges. See, everything I just listed there only involve Hunter Biden. But then when you get into the money laundering, when you get into the foreign representation of foreign countries, when you have money being made off of hostile countries and influence being sold and peddled in the body of Vice President Joe Biden, those charges are nowhere to be found. Why? Because that will implicate Joe Biden, the embodiment of the rule of law. And there's all this talk about how Joe Biden is not going to issue a pardon for Hunter Biden, right? That's what he promised he wouldn't pardon him.
Your son Hunter is on trial, and I know that you cannot speak about an ongoing federal prosecution. But let me ask you, will you accept the jury's outcome, their verdict, no matter what it is?
Yes.
And have you ruled out a pardon for your son?
Yes.
Well, follow-up question. What about a commutation? You've ruled out a pardon, but what if he gets sentenced to 25 years in prison? Will you commute his sentence? CNN is already dangling that balloon.
This trial. Now, I will note the president has said that he would not pardon his son, that he will respect the verdict. I will note, look, legal nerd here, right, recovering lawyer, there's also the option to potentially commute any sentence. While he may not pardon his son, he would have the option to commute whatever sentence his son receives here for this trial. So if at the end of his term his son is still serving that sentence, he could potentially commute his sentence. So something important to remember, even though his father has said at this point he would not offer him a pardon, but he has received unwavering.
Yeah, absolutely. The commutation is certainly still hanging there. Also, Andrew Weissman saying, there wasn't even a suggestion. Of course, he wouldn't pardon him, and he didn't intervene, and he didn't put a stop to these investigations. Yeah, because he's running for re-election. Is there any doubt in anyone's mind that Biden wouldn't have intervened if he hadn't done that? And also, this fig leaf that they put in front of Hunter Biden to use as this sacrificial lamb to show that no one is above the law, it's meant to silence people who complain about the ridiculous charges that have been brought against Donald Trump, right? Well, sure, the Republican nominee has been convicted, but the son of the president's been convicted, so it's even, right? It's fair and square. That's what this is all meant to do. It's meant to shut you up. It's meant to be a talking point. Would Joe Biden sell out his own son just so he could have political cover during his election campaign? Would he sell out his own son just so he could have a talking point in the debate, and he can properly call Donald Trump a convicted felon without any sort of sign of hypocrisy, considering his son has also been convicted of a felony? Would Joe Biden do that to save his own political skin? Of course he would. Of course he would. The man doesn't have any values. The man doesn't have any principles. And that man doesn't have any achievements. The man's only guiding North Star, his moral compass, is not a moral compass. It's a narcissism compass. Every single decision he has made in his entire career has been to advance himself politically and to save his political hide. And if that means throwing his son under the bus, of course. He uses his dead son on a daily basis to advance his political interests. Of course he would serve up. For God's sake, he used his son, Hunter Biden, as his bag man. He knew that his son was an addict. He knew that his son was self-destructive. He knew that his son was involved in all these horrible things, but he kept pushing him out there and getting him out there to be the man to bring money into the Biden family. He doesn't care about his son, or he doesn't act like he cares about his son. So would he be so craven politically to actually use him as a political pawn, sacrifice him so that he can have some sort of pristine veneer about him, be imbued with some sort of sanctimony as he runs for president now against Donald Trump? You bet your ass he would. There is nothing in Joe Biden's entire career that suggests he wouldn't do that if it serves him. He has used and abused his child to serve his own selfish interests his entire career. That's why he uses them as props all the time. Look at how dysfunctional his family is. All of the things that we have learned about them. Does that happen by accident? No, this is the obvious reaction to people who recognize that their power-hungry, craven, amoral father see them as a means to an end. It's so horrific that you almost come this close to pitying them, and then you realize how much contempt they hold you in, and the pity goes away quickly. Speaking of pitiful performances, here's Chuck Tide over on MSNBC analyzing these guilty verdicts.
I also want to pull back even more here. There's not many countries in the world where the son or daughter of said country would get prosecuted in their judicial system. This is how different America is, and I do think that this is a really good day for the American system. Okay, that you know what, it really does try to operate. You know, no one says it's perfect. We have plenty of flawed individuals in the judiciary branch. We learn about more and more of them every day, some days. But the system itself, the whole idea of it, today in that sense was a good day. I mean, think about this. He got convicted by a jury in Delaware. Okay, Biden is the first, they're arguably the most well-known family in the state of Delaware, perhaps responsible for so many things that Delaware has from the government today. So, the location of this guilty verdict, I think, mattered. As somebody pointed out earlier, with the First Lady of the United States, that's putting certainly perhaps some people would have thought that's trying to put a finger on the scale in a place like Delaware, and that didn't matter. So
look at how they're dancing around the obvious. I mean, he's saying how virtuous and wonderful our country is in the fact that this person got convicted, despite the fact that the corrupt Biden family tried to influence the jury. But what kind of cognitive dissonance do you have to have in your brain to be able to take half of it and just file it away in a locker somewhere and actually pretend that this in some way shows the virtue of our nation and our judicial system? That you see what they're setting up here. They're setting up a way to blunt any attacks that Trump and Republicans have on what is clearly a corrupt system that we've seen play out in New York, in Florida, in Georgia, and in Washington, D.C. when it comes to investigating and convicting Donald Trump. This is the sacrifice. This is the sacrificial lamb that they're doing. Also, go back to Andrew Weissman there, who said, I've been a federal prosecutor, and these charges just don't get brought against people. These charges, nobody gets convicted of this crime. I find that to be amusing, to say the least, considering these are the kind of laws that Democrats, raise millions and millions of dollars from anti-gun lobbying groups to get on the books. Anytime there's a shooting and there's a murder, instead of actually arresting and convicting the criminals and throwing them behind bars, because, Democrats are the party of not convicting criminals, not arresting criminals. They're the party of defunding the police, of no cash bail, of commuting sentences, of opening up the prisons and letting criminals out on the streets. But then they love adding law after law after law after law that only law-abiding Americans who respect the Second Amendment and respect the law will follow when it comes to gun ownership. And they cram those laws down your throat. You're the only ones who will follow them. And then here's one of those laws that the president's son violated. And Andrew Weissman, the Democrat activist, former prosecutor of the Justice Department, says, yeah, we never prosecute this. Oh, and in that vein, what's on President Biden's schedule today of all days? 1:30 p.m. official schedule. The president delivers remarks at Everytown's Gun Sense University at the Washington Hilton. He's going to be delivering a speech about more common sense gun safety measures. See, they used to call them gun control laws, but they found out that the American people hate the idea of the government controlling our ownership and possession and free exercise of self-defense with firearms because the Second Amendment protects it. So they changed that. It's not a gun control law anymore. It's a common sense gun safety measure. And one of those common sense gun safety measures that Joe Biden and the Democrats in Everytown's USA would push is the very law that Hunter Biden just violated. Hunter Biden, the son of the president, the smartest man the president's ever met. the man who Joe Biden has said repeatedly for the last several years did absolutely nothing wrong. That guy, Hunter Biden. By the way, Hunter Biden continues to be under investigation by the House of Representatives, the Judicial Committee, the Oversight Committee, as well as the Ways and Means Committee. So is the president's brother. And there's still an open impeachment investigation into the president himself, Joe Biden. Are we to believe that the convicted felon son of the president, who was also tangled in the web of shell corporations, bank accounts, money transfers, cash checks, and influence peddling, are we to believe that that convicted felon who was a drug addict and illegally obtained and possessed a firearm, that in some way that's the only crime he ever committed? And all those other crimes that actually involve his father and influence peddling and money laundering, that's all fake news. That's all just Republican right-wing hysteria. Is that what we're to believe? If you watch cable news too much, that's what you're to believe. If you listen to Democrats on Capitol Hill, that's what you're to believe. If you're to listen to Joe Biden, the man who wants your vote for 4 more years, that's exactly what you're supposed to believe. Do you? No, neither do I. Ask yourself a question. Can your savings weather an economic storm? Think about what you put away for the future. Inflation can render cash worthless. Real estate can crash like in 2008, especially the way interest rates are right now and the way banks are sort of keeping a tight grip on lending. Economies built on a mountain of debt can fall like a house of cards. There are very few physical assets that you can own, that you can invest in, that can stand the test of time. How about gold? Yeah, gold has withstood as a valued form of money for millennia. It's why people are flocking to it now, and why Birch Gold is busier than ever. I love my friends at Birch Gold. By the way, customer service at Birch Gold, absolutely the best. They're so quick to respond to you and to give you answers to whatever question you might have. They know about this little-known tax loophole where Birch Gold lets you convert your existing retirement account into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold. And the best part is it doesn't cost you a penny out of pocket. How about getting more information? I mean, more information never hurt anyone. And you'll get that information for free. All you have to do is text Larry to 989898. You'll get a free info kit on gold. Again, can your IRA or 401k weather an economic storm? If not, or if you're not sure, call the people I trust. Birch Gold. Text Larry 989898. Secure your savings today. Now, if you were watching the events of January 6th like I was, and you saw the Capitol breached by that crowd on one side of the Capitol pushing past pretty feeble police barriers set up by the Capitol Police, and the Capitol police officers were vastly outnumbered there. And then there was some damage done to windows and doors, and cops being pushed through the back of the door as the crowd rushed in on one side of the Capitol. Now, on the other side of the Capitol, you saw Grandma and Grandpa walk through a door that was literally held open by a Capitol police officer. By the way, those people are charged with crimes too. I will literally never understand that. When you're at the Capitol and a police officer opens the door for you and you walk through it, you're guilty of a crime. No one can ever explain that to me. But if you were watching that day, I'm sure, like me, you were wondering, where the hell is the security? We've known for over a week that there was going to be this big rally on January 6th at the Ellipse. We knew that everyone was going to go to the Capitol. Basic crowd control protocols would have put security in place. And why isn't the National Guard there? You probably asked that question. And if you watched the January 6th hearings, the Select Committee on January 6th to get to the bottom and reveal the truth to the American people about everything that happened on January 6th and why it happened, you'd be left scratching your head, because nowhere ever in any of those hearings did you hear anything about the National Guard or the lack of adequate police and law enforcement at the Capitol. And by the way, anytime anybody talked about the National Guard, they threw out this fake red herring that Donald Trump should have called in the National Guard, or even worse, that Donald Trump prevented the National Guard from coming in. Both of those things are false. The president can't call in the National Guard for domestic purposes. That's constitutionally untenable. It's got to be a local governor who calls in the state National Guard. And in the case of the District of Columbia, which is not a state, thank God, it's a combination of the mayor of D.C. and the Speaker of the House if it pertains to security and law enforcement or crowd control needs at the Capitol. That would be Nancy Pelosi. And of course, Donald Trump didn't block the National Guard. In fact, he preemptively authorized the National Guard if, in fact, the request was made. So what in hell happened? Right? You're left scratching your head because the January 6th committee, the select committee, they never addressed this issue. And when you know that the Speaker of the House is Democrat Nancy Pelosi, you start to smell a rat. Oh, she's the one who should have called in the National Guard and never did. Where the hell is Nancy Pelosi? And up until late yesterday afternoon, we've never had an adequate answer to that question, but now we do. This video would be a smoking gun. This is Nancy Pelosi being hurried out of the Capitol in her limousine Suburban, and the film is being documented, ironically, by her own daughter, who had a deal with HBO to make a documentary about this transition of power. It's almost like they knew something was going to happen, isn't it? Why else would her daughter, the documentarian, be there documenting everything? Well, watch Nancy Pelosi. Listen to Nancy Pelosi.
We have responsibility, Terry. We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. This is ridiculous. You're going to ask me in the middle of the thing when they've already breached the inaugural stuff that should we call the Capitol Police? I mean, the National Guard? Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient
That
resources.
is not a question of how they had been. They don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more.
Wow, this is enlightening on several levels, and we're going to break this down piece by piece, and then we're going to show you some other things that have been said about that day and show how this actually coincides with a lot of things that we crazy far right-wing conspiracy theorists, J6 deniers have been saying since day one. Let's watch this again together, shall we?
We have responsibility, Terry.
Talking about Terry McAuliffe. No, not the former governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe, the chief of staff of Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House.
We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. This is ridiculous. You're going to ask me in the middle of the thing when they've already breached the inaugural stuff.
She means the scaffolds that were set up to accommodate the cameras and the crowds and everything that is been set up for the inaugural that was to take place 2 weeks later. You've seen the videos of people climbing up on all the scaffolds and throwing things.
Should we call the Capitol Police? I mean, the National Guard?
Yeah, should we call the Capitol Police is an odd thing, and she corrects herself and says National Guard. This is something that's never been mentioned here. You know, the Capitol Police is not a very large police force. In Washington, D.C., there are many, many, many law enforcement agencies that all have kind of overlapping jurisdictions, but also they have jurisdictions that sort of butt heads with each other. Now, on a day like this on Capitol Hill, with so much going on, you had, and I'm just going to give you the brief overview of law enforcement. You've got Capitol Police, probably the smallest police force of all of the entities there. Their job is to facilitate security at the Capitol, shockingly. Usually that involves, basic ingress and egress of the building, checking through, metal detectors and x-ray machines, checking for appropriate credentials and identifications and things like that. But it's not to handle a mob. It's not even to handle a big demonstration or protest, which happens a lot. When there's a protest in numbers, they always call in reinforcements. Now, you got Capitol Police that really just handle the building and the personal security of the members of Congress. So Capitol Police was never designed to handle a big crowd. You've also got the DC Metro Police. They were there in a certain level of presence, but not at the level they should have been. Certainly, again, that's Mayor Bowser's decision and the chief of police. You have the Park Police. Now, the Park Police is in charge of the National Mall, the monuments, the various areas that are national parks, which are right there. You've also got Secret Service. They're a law enforcement agency as well. And they were there because Kamala Harris, who is now in line for the presidency at that time, or was under Secret Service protection, she was there, as was Vice President Mike Pence. And even Nancy Pelosi has a certain level of Secret Service detail because she is in the line of succession for the White House, which is a chilling thought. You've also got the FBI law enforcement agencies, and they're in Washington, D.C. quite a bit, and they have a certain function as well. And, well, I think we've learned now after the fact that there was a big FBI presence there that day, but I guess we're still not supposed to talk about that, are we? They were sort of keeping that on the down low. That's just a handful of the law enforcement agencies there. But here's the important thing. When it comes to voluminous, large, giant numbers, like for an inauguration or for the March for Life or for any other kind of big demonstration that happens on the mall, National Guard. National Guard, that's what they do. National Guard gets called in to supplement in just sheer raw numbers all of those other law enforcement agencies that I just detailed. And here's Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, who is the person who would have been responsible for calling in the National Guard, asking, I guess rhetorically, should we call in the National Guard?
Should we call the Capitol Police? I mean, the National Guard? Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
She's the one who would have the answer to that question. She's the one who's supposed to call them in advance. Now, we'll get to why she didn't and why she didn't know about this in just a moment, because we have testimony from the police chief, the Capitol Police chief, who was in charge that day. And we'll show you his testimony coming up in a moment. You didn't see it during the J6 hearings. You only saw it after the fact when Republicans had the majority in the House. And we'll show you what he had to say about the National Guard. But Nancy finishes here.
They thought that they had sufficient
No,
resources.
there's not a question of how they have, but they don't know.
Who's they? Are they talking about the Capitol Police? Because the Capitol Police never said that they had sufficient personnel. In fact, Capitol Police specifically asked for the National Guard. That's Chief Sund. We'll show you his testimony in a moment. So who exactly do they mean? They thought they had sufficient numbers. Do they mean Park Police? Do they mean DC Metro Police? Who's they? I'm literally asking that question because I don't know, even though we had a select committee on January 6th, headed up by Liz Cheney, to get to the truth and reveal all of these facts to us, the American people, about what happened on the darkest day of our democracy, the darkest day, even including Pearl Harbor and September 11th. This is the worst day in our history. And yet, I have no idea what they're talking about when they say they thought they had sufficient people. Who's they?
They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more.
I take responsibility. That's a fascinating thing that you never heard again from Nancy Pelosi. In fact, you heard quite the opposite. She deflected responsibility to everyone involved, mostly to Donald Trump and, well, to you, if you voted for or supported Donald Trump, because you're all MAGA fascists who want to shred our Constitution. I take full responsibility. She never accepted responsibility. She deflected it the entire time. In fact, I will argue that the entire January 6th Select Committee was designed to cover this up, to hide the truth, to hide the facts about the most seminal, important aspect of the events of January 6th, and that is the lack of security, the lack of coordination, the seemingly inappropriate level of protection for Congress that day. The January 6th committee never having uncovered or even asked the question about appropriate law enforcement and appropriate security on the day of January 6th, the fact that they never delved into that or asked any of those questions tells me that that committee was designed on purpose to ignore that issue. And who put together that committee? That woman right there, Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi, who claims she's taking responsibility, that she has accountability on this. And then she put together the January 6th Select Committee. And when Kevin McCarthy said, okay, well, as is tradition, the minority is allowed to appoint their members to the committee. Here's Congressman Jim Jordan and I believe Andy Biggs of Arizona. And Nancy Pelosi said, nope, they can't be on the committee. Unprecedented. First time in American history that the Speaker of the House denied the minority leader representation on a committee. Nancy Pelosi hand-selected the members of the minority party to be on that committee. Why would she not want Jim Jordan on that committee? Maybe because Jim Jordan would ask about this. So instead, it was Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, neither of whom are in Congress anymore because their voters rejected them. Their job was not to get to the truth. Their job was to cover this up and then to spin a new narrative, a narrative that was going to finish Trump forever. Oh, after this committee, no one will ever support Donald Trump, except the American people are smarter than that. And we smelled it for what it was. Now, this video hit yesterday. Yesterday afternoon is when this video hit. And over on MSNBC, Nicole Wallace had the get of a lifetime. This is the hottest story in America. We've got this smoking gun video of Nancy Pelosi. And so Nicole Wallace gets Nancy Pelosi, and now she can ask her about this. I'm going to pause this immediately after you see the first question she asks. Then you'll see the answer. But we got to analyze the question first.
Why do you think this is stirred up and a brouhaha on the right and in some corners of the media today?
Wow, that is, I gotta say, I am rarely actually surprised at how low Nicole Wallace and MSNBC can go in their lying, agenda-driven propaganda. But that was the first question. Why do you think the right even cares about it? Why do you think this has become an issue? Really, Nicole, you don't see it? You're not sure why? This is insane that's the question that's asked. This is a great opportunity to say, why didn't you call in the National Guard? Because the chief of police of the Capitol Police said that they asked for the National Guard and your security chief denied them that. Why didn't you know about requests for the National Guard? Because you seem to not even know if the National Guard was requested, or because you were asking where the National Guard was or whether you should call in the National Guard. By the way, spoiler alert, National Guard didn't actually get mobilized until 5 p.m. that day. 5 p.m. Hours after that video that you just saw. There's so many questions that could have been asked. When you say you take full accountability, why haven't you actually taken responsibility? Because you've been pointing the finger at everybody. And why didn't we learn about any of this in the January 6th committee? I would have asked Nancy Pelosi a lot of questions other than, gee, why do you think conservatives and those idiots on the right are making a big deal out of this? Nicole Wallace, by the way, should be known, is a Republican. She's the one who was in charge of Sarah Palin's candidacy when she was running as vice president with John McCain. It was her idea to have Sarah Palin have a sit down with Katie Couric. That's who Nicole Wallace is. Let's watch Nancy Pelosi's answer. It's really, really educational.
Well, because of the fact is that the president of the United States, the former president, and his toadies do not want to face the facts. They're trying to do revisionist history on January 6th. But
I'm sorry. Revisionist history? No, there's nothing to revise. Those were your words. That was you on the video saying the things that you said. No one's revising history. We're actually revealing history. This is like how Libs of TikTok gets in trouble, because all she does is take the videos of these maniacs on TikTok and then puts it on Twitter for everybody to see. And then the maniacs on the left say, how dare you show us who we are, saying what we say out of our own mouths? What do you mean revisionist history? All right, I'm sorry, Nancy, please. I didn't mean to interrupt. That was rude.
We cannot let us be dragged into their, again, false impression of what happened that day. They know what happened that day. They know how serious it is and was and continues to have an impact on our country. And yet they want to call the people who were in there hostages. Last night I received the Lincoln Award. I was so proud of receiving that. And I said in my remarks, Lincoln built the dome on the Capitol. He insisted that it be built during the Civil War so that it could show the resilience of America. And to see these people coming through the Capitol with their foul deeds and foul actions, waving Confederate flags and Nazi flags under Lincoln's dome was so shameful.
Gee, Nancy Pelosi, what's this whole, you not knowing about the National Guard and getting overwhelmed because there wasn't enough police and saying that you take responsibility for it? What was that all about? Well, let me tell you a story about Abraham Lincoln. But I don't remember anybody waving a Nazi flag, by the way. I don't think I remember seeing a Confederate flag. I know they had that hateful appeal to heaven flag. That's triggering. But this entire answer, and it goes on for another minute, is it even worth showing the last minute of this, Kevin McMahon? We can't.
I think we should.
Should we? All right. But this entire thing is really a non-answer. She's not actually responding to the news of the day in this video of her and what she said and what was going on at that moment. It's just another opportunity for her to dredge up the narrative that she created through her own toadies on the January 6th Select Committee to basically tell a narrative that is contrary to this little glimpse of fact that we've now had revealed to us. That she took responsibility, that she didn't know anything about security, that she didn't know anything about the National Guard, that she was clueless at a time when she was actually supposed to be the one providing security for herself and the members of Congress on that important day on January 6th. And she, through her staff, actually denied National Guard presence that day. We'll get to that in a moment with Chief Sund, but sure, let's finish up Nancy Pelosi's diversion here.
And yet this president who incited, this former president who incited this insurrection would not send the National Guard for hours. People were harmed, people were killed, but died one way or another. And what did he do but try to deny that any of it happened?
Hold on. I'm sorry. I don't mean to keep interrupting, but she just said that Trump didn't send the National Guard. I just want to be clear again. Constitutionally, legally, the president of the United States can't send the National Guard, number one. Number two, on that video, Nancy Pelosi is not saying, should we get Trump to send the National Guard? Why doesn't Trump send the National Guard? No, that's not what she says. Let's go to the video.
Should we call the Capitol Police? I mean, the National Guard? Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
She says, should we call the National Guard? Why weren't they there to begin with? She's not saying Trump should call. Quick, get Trump on the phone and get the National Guard here. No, this is the news story that they have. This is the fake story they have. This is the cover story that they have. This is the lie that they have.
This is a terrible thing, but let us not take away the attention of what we need to do to go forward. We have to unify our country. We have to bring people together in a way that honors the vision of our founders, the sacrifice of our men and women in uniform, as well as the aspirations of our children. I just came back from D-Day in Normandy to see our veterans there. It was the 80th anniversary of it. Some of the youngest of them were 97, some over 100. They fought for our freedom, and yet you see how it is being denigrated by the former president and his Republican toadies.
She literally just said, we have to come together and unite over the D-Day veterans, the people who have fought for freedom and fought to protect our nation and our ideals, and then in the same breath calls Trump and people who support Trump toadies. Let's unite, except for those toadies who we hate. Those MAGA fascist extremists who basically were the same people that our D-Day veterans were killing in Europe and liberating people from. The height of deceit and despicable behavior from this woman, it can't be matched, and it continues. By the way, who else knew about what was going on that day? Donald Trump. Interview with Kristen Welker, Meet the Press, just a few months ago. And watch how Kristen Welker is really engaged in this issue.
By the way,
on that day,
Nancy Pelosi,
I
I don't have, why would I tell you that? Listen, Nancy
talk about
Pelosi
that?
was in charge of security. She turned down 10,000 soldiers. If she didn't turn down the soldiers, you wouldn't have had January 6th.
Did you call military or law enforcement?
So here's Donald Trump saying Nancy Pelosi was in charge of security on Capitol Hill. Nancy Pelosi turned down 10,000 troops. If she had those 10,000 troops, this never would have happened. And the only question Kristen Welker gets from that, boy, talk about the curiosity of a journalist. The only question she's got is, did you call law enforcement or the military? Which again, if you know what you're talking about, you know that the president can't do that. All right, as promised, here he is. He's a good man. He's a noble man. He is the chief of police for the Capitol Police Department. He was the chief of police on January 6th. Here he was in 2023. This is September, I believe, in 2023, when he was called by the Republican majority to tell his story. Liz Cheney never wanted to hear his story. Nancy Pelosi never wanted to hear that. You would think that you would have the chief of police from January 6th there to explain what happened. But it wasn't until Republicans were in charge that we got his testimony on camera.
When the police department becomes overwhelmed and we dial 911 because we need assistance, that goes to the National Guard. It sure as hell would have been great to know that they put out this memo restricting the National Guard from assisting my men and women in advance of January 6th, knowing now that they were so damn concerned about the violence that they were expecting to come on January 6th, and no one ever told me about it.
Yeah,
I mean, the National Guard, who's only 2 miles from our headquarters, sat and waited for the evening crew to come in. While the Pentagon was still sending resources to protect generals' homes, they sent me nobody to help my men and women.
Okay, and I only have 30 seconds left. When were you finally given the green light to bring the National Guard to the Capitol?
At 2:08 p.m. At 2:08 p.m.
So that was over an hour after you originally asked.
That is correct. I'm sorry, 2:09 p.m. 2:09 p.m. Irving finally gave me approval because I still remember where I was sitting because I screamed to the watch commander, mark the time, because I finally got approval to bring the National.
All right. That memo that he was talking about at the beginning was a letter that Mayor Bowser was part and parcel to, where they specifically said, let's not bring in the National Guard because we're worried about the optics involved after months before the Black Lives Matters protest that ended up with, arson in front of the White House, that, there was a overwhelming use of force in their minds with the Black Lives Matters protesters, and they wanted to avoid the optics of the Capitol looking militarized. So that's why they didn't want to bring in the National Guard. And, well, they certainly got a different kind of optics that day, didn't they? That's Nancy Pelosi. And that's a smoking gun video. And that's just part of the truth about January 6th that still needs to be revealed. But it's kind of hard to look at that and not reach the conclusion that Nancy Pelosi is guilty. Nancy Pelosi is guilty of negligence and of dereliction of duty. And, it appears, of a pretty major cover-up. Alejandro Mayorkas is the Secretary of Homeland Security. As you know, I'm sure he is being impeached. And he sat with Martha Raddatz of ABC News on This Week, this Sunday. And we really want to spend some time on this interview because a lot comes out. And even Martha Raddatz actually has to sort of grill him a little bit and challenge him, which you don't see very often from ABC News. And in this interview, Alejandro Mayorkas reveals that the Biden administration is actually creating safe zones in foreign countries to bring people here on flights to this country, breaching our national security so that they don't have to actually make the trek to the border. They're actually flying them in. This has been something that's been rumored and discussed and whispered about, but he brags about it in this interview. We'll get to that clip in a moment, but here, take a look at this.
President Biden said this ban will remain in place until the number of people trying to enter illegally is reduced to a level that our system can effectively manage, meaning, as we said, that average of 1,500 encounters or less over a period of 14 days. We said that has never happened. Do you really expect that to happen in the coming months or before Election Day?
Martha, it is 1,500, an average of 1,500 individuals encountered over a 7-day consecutive period. We are driving to that, and that's not all we're doing. We are also communicating throughout the region about the lawful pathways. We are driving people to
But
use.
that's something you've been doing all along. You've been trying to do that with people. I want to go back to an interview I did with you in March of 2021, 2 months into your tenure as DHS Secretary. You seemed totally confident then that you had that under control. Let's listen to what you told me.
We have seen large numbers of migration in the past. We know how to address it. We have a plan. We are executing on our plan, and we will succeed. This is what we do. But one thing is also clear, that it takes time. It's tough, but we can do it. This is what we do, and we will accomplish our mission.
We will succeed. That was 3 years ago. Since then, 6.5 million migrants have been apprehended along the southern border. It would be very hard to call that a success.
Martha, remember something, that migration is a dynamic phenomenon. It is something that we alone are, it's not just us who is experiencing it, throughout the region and throughout the world. Let's recall what everyone expected when Title 42 was lifted in May of 2023. People expected pandemonium. Our model worked. We drove the numbers down. They go down, they go up. What we need is congressional action. We cannot resource the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of State, the Department of Justice with additional personnel. We need Congress to legislate.
And we know what happened in February with Senate Republicans. President Biden told our David Muir this week that the reason he didn't implement this plan sooner is that he would have been blamed for blowing up that bipartisan deal. So why did you wait 4 months to do this?
Oh, let's look at the timeline. On day one of it.
All right, I'm going to interrupt his lies for just a second here because, yes, Martha Raddatz, I guess, deserves credit to say, I want to show you this video that we had of this interview that we had earlier. But did you notice as soon as she goes to it, Mayorkas says yes, as if he was expecting it. I want to show that to you one more time because listen to him. It's like he got a heads up that Martha Raddatz was going to pull up this old video. Listen to him.
You've been trying to do that with people. I want to go back to an interview I did with you in March of 2021.
Do you hear that? Oh, yeah. It's like if this is a gotcha moment that a journalist would have, like they have the video all prepped and said, well, let me show you what you said. Usually the person who is the subject of the interview wouldn't say, yeah, right, got it. Okay, I know exactly where you're going with this. Right? Maybe I'm just reading into it. But boy, he had his answer. Well, immigration is a fluid thing. This is a dynamic deal. At the time, I thought that we'd be okay. But this man has been an utter failure, except for the fact that he's been 100% successful. Let me explain. If you think that our border should be secure and that people shouldn't be allowed to come in illegally and breach our immigration system and enter our country without any actual accountability, and where we just throw open the gates and let people in willy-nilly, if you actually want to prevent that from happening, he's been a failure. But if that's actually your goal, he's been quite successful. And let's face it, the Democrats, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, the entire party, they've been telling us for years that that is their goal. They're a no borders crowd. They don't think that there should be any restrictions on immigration. They tell us that walls don't work, right? That if you're a good neighbor, then you don't have any walls. And we want to, bring us, you're tired, you're poor, you're hungry, you're huddled masses. They're the ones who think that Donald Trump was a meanie for saying that people can't come in here illegally. That's what they've been saying for years, decades, really. So this whole idea that Alejandro Mayorkas is a failure is only if you think that the intention is to enforce our laws, and they clearly are not. But let's get back to where we were with this interview.
On day one of his administration, President Biden sent Congress a piece of legislation. Title 42, the public health order, was in place until May of 2023. We implemented a regulation that restricted asylum, and then we pressed Congress to resource our department in August with a supplemental funding bill. That did not succeed. Then in October, we sought congressional action again. And then we started, Martha, the very difficult work of bipartisan negotiation with Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah, understood. Oh, trust me, I'm on your side on that. I've drunk that Kool-Aid. Don't worry, I'm not going to get in way of that talking point. It's such a complete bullcrap. Understand something, as he's saying here, in October, they began the tough work of bipartisan negotiations, October of 2023. What took them so long? Why did they wait so long? And by the way, this is the same guy that for every single month leading up to October of 2023, that would be 2.5 years of his tenure as Homeland Security Secretary. Under oath, he said there is no crisis, there is no chaos, that we have the border secured. The border is secure, he kept saying. And then suddenly, we need bipartisan work to get a new law here passed. Let's negotiate. Well, why? If the border is secure, if there is no crisis, why do you need to negotiate for something? Everything's great. I thought that's what you said. This is so maddening to watch. And again, the whole point here is to be able to blame Republicans. That's all they care about. They know that the American voter is pissed off about the border, but they're actually trying to say, listen, we can't change the border at this point. It's too late. All we can do is lie enough to make enough voters think that the crisis is really Republicans' fault. It's audacious, but thankfully they've got people like Martha Raddatz in the media to help them.
And I know you nearly had that bipartisan deal, but it's been 4 months since then, and you just now decided to take this action.
Martha, the bipartisan deal was rejected once. We pressed for it again. It was rejected a second time, and then we developed this and have implemented it.
Yeah. Did any of you wonder why last week Chuck Schumer decided to bring that bill once again to the floor? It was so he could have that answer. See, this was rejected in February. And Raddatz is correct. Okay, after it got rejected, if the president wanted to do something, why didn't you do it then? And by the way, Biden did worse than not do anything. He lied and claimed to the media that he couldn't do anything. We've got those videos. We've done segments on it. He kept saying, no, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing more I can do. You got to give me the power. You got to pass the bill that I want. There's nothing I can do. I can't do anymore. We've had Karine Jean-Pierre saying that all the time. He can't do anymore. Can't do anymore. Can't do anymore. But for 4 months, they did nothing. And then Chuck Schumer, inexplicably, without any explanation, decided to bring this bill to the floor for a vote 10 days ago. Why? So he could have that answer. Yep. It got rejected in February. We decided to bring it back again in May. Once it got rejected, then Joe Biden is a man of action and he did something. Even though for the last 3.5 years, he claimed that he couldn't do anything. Somehow he figured out a way that he could do something, but only Joe Biden could do it because he's that kind of a genius. He plays 4D chess while the rest of us are playing checkers.
And we are at an early stage, and let's not minimize the significance of this move and the significance of operationalizing it. And it requires the cooperation of other countries, which we have secured.
You have been dealing with this for several years. When he ran for president, and this is a big change. When he ran for president, President Biden repeatedly defended the asylum process you already had, you had in place, railed against former President Trump's plan. I want to read what then candidate Biden posted on Twitter back in July of 2019. Trump is fighting tooth and nail to deny those fleeing dangerous situations their right to seek asylum in our nation. We should uphold our moral responsibility and enforce our immigration laws with dignity, not turn away those fleeing violence, war, and poverty. How is this new policy not at odds with what the president said then?
I'm going to let him answer that question, but I need to give you some context and some facts here that Martha Raddatz won't. Let's look at that again. We should uphold our moral responsibility, enforce our immigration laws with dignity, and not turn away those fleeing violence, war, or poverty. Let me just be clear here. There are a very small number of legal reasons that you can claim asylum in our country. All right. Natural disaster is one of them. War is one of them if you're a refugee. Religious persecution, political persecution. These are all legitimate claims for asylum when you walk up to a Border Patrol agent at the border and say, I'm seeking asylum. And then you're given the protection of our country until you have a hearing where a judge can determine whether you're a legitimate refugee. Poverty is not one of them. Poverty is not one of them. Obviously, logically, it is not one of them. If we allowed people refugee status and afforded them asylum in this country because of claims of poverty, that means we would be opening up our country to about 7/8 of the world population. Because in comparison to our nation and our standard of living, 7/8 of the world is living in abject poverty. Poverty has never been a legitimate reason for asylum in the United States of America. So Joe Biden saying that when he was running for office is completely misguided, stupid, moronic, and criminal, frankly. And Martha Raddatz doesn't know that or chooses not to tell her viewers that. But let's go to Alejandro Mayorkas' answer now.
Said then is what we are living today. We are allowing individuals to access asylum through the ports of entry pursuant to a program that we developed. We are allowing people to access asylum if they come from the countries of Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela
But what
through a
about
parole
those who
program.
don't? What about those who don't? The ACLU has pledged to sue the administration over this policy, comparing it to a Trump-era one. I know there are differences, but the ACLU asserts that your policy will put thousands of lives at risk. If this is so great, why didn't he do it in the first place?
Martha, well, we've talked about that, and Congress needs to act. And in the wake of congressional action, this is the step that we take. And it's not the first step that we've taken. But I respectfully disagree with the ACLU.
By the way, this line of questioning, having the ACLU and Martha Raddatz challenge him from the left on this issue, you guys are no different than Trump. This is all calculated politically to be able to help Joe Biden, actually, for people who are so angry and pissed off at the border that they're willing to vote for Donald Trump, even if they generally don't want to, but they recognize that Joe Biden's incapable of doing it. Well, this is allowing them to say, look, even the ACLU thinks we're like Trump because we're enforcing the border, which of course they're not. They're not in any way whatsoever enforcing the border. But it is a fair question that Martha Raddatz asked. If this is such a great idea, why didn't you do it up until now? And the lie is that they wanted congressional action. Well, so what? Clearly, you can do it without congressional action. And you know the last time we had congressional action on immigration or border security? Do you know the answer to that question? 1987. 1987. That was the last time Congress acted in a bipartisan fashion. And by the way, Democrats immediately defied the deal they made with Ronald Reagan. They immediately went back on their deal. That's why Republicans should never negotiate with Democrats on immigration.
I anticipate they will sue us. We stand by the legality of what we have done. We stand by the value proposition. It's not only a matter of securing the border, Martha. We have a humanitarian obligation to keep vulnerable people out of the hands of exploitative smugglers. There have been many a story about the trauma and the tragedy inflicted by those organizations.
And how does this actually do that? I mean, that's obviously something you've been trying to do for a long time. Everyone's been trying to do.
We have increased the number of refugees that we will accept from the Western Hemisphere. We have built safe mobility offices in Colombia, Ecuador, Guatemala, Costa Rica to reach people where they are so they don't have to take the perilous journey. We are doing so very much to maintain the integrity of our asylum process and disincentivize people from risking their lives to reach the very dangerous southern border in between ports of entry.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us this morning, Mr.
Wow. That last part is really revealing, and we're going to delve into it a little bit here. But this is phenomenal. We're trying to keep the human smugglers and human traffickers and sex traffickers and drug smugglers from being able to exploit these individuals. And Martha Raddatz asked the legitimate question, how exactly are you doing that? I mean, everybody's trying to do that. How does this do that? Now, let me just offer a humble suggestion. The best way to put the human smugglers out of business, the coyotes, the drug smugglers who are using children as mules, the best way to put them out of business is to lock down the border. zero crossings, zero entries, zero tolerance. Nobody crosses. No, you ask for asylum, you stay in Mexico. You don't come here. You, period. End of story. See, the only reason why these human traffickers and these human smugglers and the drug cartels are able to exploit our laws is because they can guarantee to these poor, desperate individuals that if they get them to the border and then they cross, they'll be allowed in and they'll be able to stay. That's the product they're selling. This is basic economics. What does a human smuggler sell? They sell access to the United States of America. And they can legitimately tell their customers, these people, these children, these women who are being exploited, they can sell to their customers the service that stick with me, you give me money, I'll get you through the terrain, I'll get you up to a point of entry, you go across, you claim asylum, and you're in. And they deliver. Now, if the United States changes its policy and says no one is allowed in, no one is allowed in. You want asylum, you claim asylum in your own country, and we'll have a hearing before we let you in, or you remain in Mexico. As soon as you do that, you put the human traffickers out of business. It's that simple. It's logical. But there was something else he said here that requires a little bit more investigation.
We have increased the number of refugees that we will accept from the Western Hemisphere. We have built safe mobility offices in Colombia, Ecuador, Guatemala, Costa Rica to reach people where they are so they don't have to take the perilous journey.
That is, for the first time on the record, the Secretary of Homeland Security confirming a program that has been discussed and talked about and written about in pages like Town Hall, Red State, PJ Media, and our friends over at the Federalist. I know they've delved into it as well, and Breitbart, that under the Biden administration, they are actually facilitating the transport of people who would normally be illegal immigrants coming into the country across our border. They're actually flying them in from their cities so they don't show up on Bill Malugion's drone footage at the border, or Julio Rosas covering the extraordinary scenes down on our southern border. Yeah, we don't want all you Venezuelans and Ecuadorians and Colombians and everything showing up on the border. Makes us look bad. So we'll set up these offices in your countries. We'll process you there. You're still an illegal immigrant. Don't worry, you're still going to be welcome. And then we'll fly you in. And we did a little digging, and here it is. Biden administration's State Department website. It's a safe mobility initiative. It's part of the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. United States has led the largest expansion in decades of lawful pathways to the United States to help refugees, vulnerable migrants, and other forcibly displaced persons in the Western Hemisphere. They're called safe mobility offices, as you just heard Mayorkas explain. And what happens here is the Safe Mobility Initiative facilitates expedited refugee processing via the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program and provides information or referrals to humanitarian parole, family reunification, and labor pathways through safe mobility offices in Colombia, Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Ecuador. Tens of thousands of people have already submitted a free application. SMOs are reviewing applications for eligibility and international protection needs and contacting applicants to provide information about a potential lawful pathway and to schedule an appointment for further processing. And this, of course, bypasses the legal immigration system completely. Now, there was something like this under Donald Trump that the Biden administration actually criticized and shut down the second they came into office. That was the idea that if you want to seek asylum, you do it in your home country. Now they've modified it, but they've actually regulated it, busted it up on steroids, and they've actually thrown a whole bunch of money to it to actually fly people in and the only reason they did it is to clean up the optics of what was going on the border. But again, the countries that are involved here, Costa Rica, why exactly does somebody get refugee status from Costa Rica? Costa Rica is a relatively prosperous country, that's relatively safe. There's no political persecution. Why in the hell would you be a refugee from Costa Rica or Colombia, for that matter? fascinating. Maybe the Republicans should look into that too. After all, they're in charge of Congress. Might be a problem. But that's Alejandro Mayorkas, and he's guilty. He's guilty of undermining our nation's security. He's guilty of violating our immigration laws. He's guilty of lying before Congress and dereliction of his duty as well. Whole lot of guilty Democrats in today's show. I hope you were keeping track. But that is it for this time, because we're out of time. But we'll be back next time. And in the meantime, I'm Larry O'Connor. You can call me Larry.